All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. We have a lot of news to get into today. Yesterday, we had a major bombshell that Hamas and Israel had officially agreed to the peace deal, to the ceasefire, to end the ongoing devastation that has taken place in Gaza over the past 2 years. And I say ongoing because it is continuing to go on right this very moment. So we'll get into that today. Even as the peace deal seems to have been signed, we still have ongoing bombing campaigns in Gaza as we speak, and there have been multiple deaths just today in Gaza thanks to the IDF. So we'll get into that. Also, I do want to touch on what the people in Israel are saying about this deal. There are conflicting reactions to this deal all across the Israeli political spectrum, so we'll get into some of the news about that. We'll also touch on what Donald Trump has said about the deal, and we'll cover all this and so much more today on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.
End all of these wars. America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. All right, everybody, before we get into it, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. It helps me out a lot. Also, if you could go to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and follow all those pages over there, I'd really appreciate that a lot. But let's get right into the news. So yesterday evening, Donald Trump sent out a Truth Social post announcing that Israel and Hamas had reached a deal to come to a ceasefire agreement in the ongoing war in Gaza. So here's what I want to read the Truth Social post that Donald Trump sent out at 6:51 yesterday, October 8th, 2025. And it says, quote, "I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed-upon line as the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, and all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic, unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America." So that's Donald Trump's statement. That was yesterday at 6:51 p.m., and that came after he was actually handed a note by Marco Rubio. They were doing a roundtable with Rubio and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Trump and some social media influencers discussing crime in the ongoing street battles, basically, between the ICE agents and people in Portland and Chicago and cities like that. They were doing a roundtable discussing that, and Marco Rubio gets up and hands Trump a note in the middle of it and whispers in his ear, seemingly telling him about this news. And Donald Trump kind of broke the news right there, and then would go on to tweet this out, and then had an interview later on with Sean Hannity, where he explained kind of more in detail what the deal was going to be involving. So Trump is saying that the first phase of this deal will involve Hamas handing over the 20 alive hostages back to Israel, as well as 28 bodies of dead hostages that died under their watch. And this is where it could get complicated. We'll see how this goes. But Hamas is apparently signaling that they may not be able to find all the bodies because of the rubble. I don't know. That could get very complicated, and I don't know if that's a good thing for negotiations. We'll see how it goes, but, I mean, that's just what they're saying. No real word on that yet. Trump was asked about that earlier and kind of just didn't really have a strong answer for it, so we'll see what the posturing in response to that will be from Israel and America. But no word on that just yet. The other end of this deal is what Israel will be doing. Israel now also will be handing over Palestinian prisoners. I forget the exact number, but they're going to be handing over a bunch of Palestinian prisoners and returning them to Gaza. And for those who don't know, we say prisoners, but it's basically hostages. There are a lot of people in prisons in Israel that are Palestinians that are taken in by the IDF and are not charged with a crime. They're held without any due process and are not convicted of a single. There's a ton of prisoners. We call them prisoners, but they're really hostages that are being held by the IDF and by Israel that are Palestinians that have not committed or been convicted of a crime. So that a bunch of them will be returned to Gaza. And so it'll basically be a hostage swap in that sense. There will also be the deal that the IDF will withdraw to a certain line in Gaza, and eventually it seems that Trump wants them to withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip, which this is where things are going to get testy. We'll talk about it later on in this episode, but the far-right ministers in Israel are not very excited about this idea, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, that is the deal. That is phase one of this deal. It's basically a hostage swap and a IDF phase one withdrawal to a certain set line. Now, everything so far, right now, as this is right now, it's a so far so good situation. And both sides seem to be negotiating in somewhat good faith in trying to get this done. Both sides do seem to want somewhat to get this done. And by both sides, I mean the negotiating teams. I don't mean everyone on either side, just to be clear about that. Because I don't think there's members of Hamas who want to get this done. I don't think there's members of the Israeli side that want to get this done. I do also want to touch on the fact that as we speak right now, as we're told that this ceasefire is coming in the coming days and potentially even the coming hours, Israel has wasted no time today continuing their bombing campaigns in Gaza City. And I do want to read this article real quick, of just chunks of this article from antiwar.com, which, by the way, I would highly recommend everyone who's trying to keep track of Ukraine, of Gaza, of all these different wars across the world. I would highly recommend antiwar.com. That is the website run by Dave DeCamp. It is just the best source for on-the-ground sources to keep up to date on all these wars. Anyways, this is an article by Dave DeCamp from October 9th, 2025, 1:23 p.m., so earlier today, and it's titled, Israeli Attacks Continued to Kill Palestinians in Gaza Despite Ceasefire Deal Announcement. And it says, quote, Israeli bombs and gunfire continued to kill Palestinians in Gaza on Thursday, despite the announcement that Israel and Hamas have reached an agreement on the first phase of a ceasefire deal, which still needs to be formally approved by the Israeli government, which is expected to happen later in the day. According to the Palestinian news agency WAFA, at least 17 bodies were brought to hospitals across Gaza, including 10 that were recovered from the rubble or succumbed to wounds from a previous attack, and 7 who were killed on Thursday. Medical sources speaking to Middle East Eye put the death toll higher, saying at least 9 people were killed on Thursday. Gaza's health ministry said in its daily update, which is released about midday Gaza time, that at least 10 Palestinians were killed and 49 were injured over the previous 24-hour period. Among the dead were 2 Palestinians killed while attempting to get aid. Israeli attacks on Thursday included strikes on Gaza City and Khan Yunis. According to WAFA, at least 1 Palestinian was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Khan Yunis, and another was killed by a drone attack in another city. Another person was killed by Israeli gunfire in the northwest of the city. So, as we speak, attacks still ongoing in Gaza. There was video going around on X earlier today of IDF tanks that have been moving into Gaza City for a couple weeks at this point, just firing at civilians that are just out and about. So the attacks haven't slowed up. They have not slowed up since this was announced. The ceasefire deal was announced. And hopefully they will slow up when the ceasefire deal is set in stone. But it does tell you a lot about the state of the IDF and the state of what the mindset of the Israelis is, the Israeli leadership, in that they never wanted peace. I made this clear in a couple episodes back here on the podcast, that it is against the current Israeli government's interests, actually, to go for peace. And by that, I mean Netanyahu is very likely going to be out of office. This was a point being made today, actually, during the press conference that Trump was in today about this deal. That was during the cabinet meeting. He was asked about whether he thinks Netanyahu will be out of office as a result of this, because, as we'll get into in just a second, his political coalition is not very happy about this. And this is a very real threat for the Netanyahu government. He very well, early 2026, could be up for re-election, and his past could come back to haunt him, as we were talking about. He was up for corruption trials before October 7th. So he's not in a good place because of these deals. And now the media is trying to spin this in the most ridiculous way, that Netanyahu's popular now, and that overnight Netanyahu suddenly became the most popular man in the world because he agreed to a peace deal. As if everyone in the country is just stupid and forgets, and for some reason has had their mind erased by some memory erasing gun or something, and forgets about the past 2 years of psychopathic behavior by the Netanyahu government. So, I do want to move on here to now the Netanyahu government itself and their response to this ceasefire deal. Bezalel Smotrich, who is a common target of mine here on the show, who is the finance minister over in Israel for the Netanyahu administration, he is very much against this deal. He made that clear just a couple hours ago when he made it known that he will vote against this when it comes up for vote in the Israeli government. And he says he wants war to continue. This is a Times of Israel article from Sam Sokol from 11 hours ago. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich says his far-right religious Zionism party will not vote in support of a Gaza ceasefire deal that will see hostages freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and a halt of fighting in Gaza. Smotrich expressed mixed feelings, saying that while he feels immense joy at the pending return of the hostages, he feels, quote, tremendous fear of the consequences of emptying the prisons and releasing the next generation of terrorist leaders who will do everything to continue spilling rivers of Jewish blood, God forbid. As such, he says, quote, we cannot join in the short-sighted celebrations or vote in favor of the deal. The Security Cabinet is set to meet this afternoon to be briefed on the Gaza ceasefire deal, with the full government meeting afterward to vote on the agreement. A substantial majority in favor of the deal is expected. So, regardless of what Smotrich is saying, they're going to most likely pass this deal, and the deal will move forward. Why it's important, though, that Smotrich, and we'll get into it in a second, Ben-Gvir, and their little political coalitions are not going to support this is because these are the political coalitions that have been propping up Benjamin Netanyahu. And they have been propping him up in the Likud party for the last couple of years since his falling out with basically everyone else because of his corruption trials. He had a major fall from grace, and he was going to probably go to jail for a long time, for a significant amount of time. And these guys basically picked him up from the ashes and wanted to use his political infrastructure to carry forth their message and their goals for greater Israel, which is what we have seen over the past 2 years. Now, there's one more article here that I do want to read from the Times of Israel. Again, this one's focused on Itamar Ben-Gvir. It's titled, Ben-Gvir announces his party will oppose ceasefire and hostage release deal. It is by Ariel Carmel, and it just came out a couple minutes before I started recording, so this is just breaking right now. It says, quote, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir says his party will vote against the first phase of the ceasefire deal announced today, in which Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for all 48 Israeli hostages held in Gaza. Ben-Gvir's party is not exiting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition now, but he warns that if Hamas is not dismantled, the party will, quote, bring down the government. And it continues on here about Bezalel Smotrich. It says, quote, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, a fellow far-right leader, likewise announced that his religious Zionism party will oppose the deal. The cabinet is currently convening to vote on the deal and is expected to approve it following a more than 3-hour delay over Ben-Gvir's demands regarding the list of 250 Palestinian security prisoners serving life sentences who are slated to be released. It says, quote, our hearts are filled with joy, happiness, and excitement that all the hostages are expected to return home, the minister says in a statement. But, quote, but along this joy, we must not, under any circumstances, ignore the question of the price, the release of thousands of terrorists, including 250 murderers who are expected to be freed from prison. As a result, he says his party cannot vote, quote, in favor of a deal that releases those murderous terrorists, and we will oppose it in the government. So, again, I want to make it very clear. This deal is going to most likely go forward. That's not what's in question here. What's in question here is that will Netanyahu now, will these guys leave the government if this goes forward? And if they leave the government, will that pressure Netanyahu to put his own political interests over the peace in the region? Which, it's not a crazy question to ask, given that every single time that question has been brought up, he's always gone with his political interests. He's never done anything in the interest of peace. He's only ever done stuff in the interests of his political interests. Anything to further his political career, his political goals, his aspirations of creating a legacy for himself as the greatest prime minister in Israeli history. He's always erred on the side of doing that rather than accomplishing real peace in the region. In fact, many of the things he's done over the years have been purposefully to prevent peace in the region and keep Gaza and Israel and the West Bank all divided against each other. That's been his main goal for pretty much his entire career. So it's not crazy to ask, now that peace is being truly discussed for the first time in a long time, is he serious? Because we've never had an instance before where he's serious about peace. So it's important to keep an eye on that, especially as his coalition is currently imploding because of this. And we'll see what happens. I'm feeling optimistic. I do think Donald Trump does want to get this done, because I think he acknowledges, and there's been leaks into Axios about quotes from him that have been leaked into Axios, into the media, into the Wall Street Journal, basically saying this, where they're saying that Trump is fed up with Netanyahu's endless wishes to continue this war. And he acknowledges that his own coalition, the MAGA coalition, people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, all these figures, these very powerful figures in that movement, are starting to very heavily turn against Israel. And the continued support from this administration for Israel is very detrimental, not only for the midterms, but we're looking forward to 2028. This is going to be a major, major issue. Not only, again, this is going to be a major issue in the midterms, so let's just keep an eye on the midterms for now. This is going to be a major issue. Are people running these midterms going to be people who are on record supporting what Israel did in Gaza over the past 2 years? But not only that, this has started a wider conversation about war as a whole on the right wing, and that's going to be a serious conversation in 2028 when J.D. Vance is up for what we assume he's going to be running for president. People going against him, whether it be potentially a Thomas Massey or potentially some other figures, this topic of war as a whole and these guys' records on foreign wars is going to be a major topic of conversation. So we'll see what happens there. But I think Trump does recognize that that's a serious factor here in America, which is that the people of America are against this war. They have been against this war for a long time at this point. People right, left, and center have made it known in poll after poll, especially young people, that they're very much against this war. And I think he acknowledges that the PR looks really bad if, regardless of what the people say, that the government is continuing to blindly support this foreign nation. So we'll see what happens. I'm very hopeful that this could potentially be a peaceful ending to this war that has gone on far too long. And I do want to make it very clear, hopefully we get peace here. We should never forget the disgraceful actions from this government and the Biden administration in continuing this war for as long as they did and putting up with Netanyahu's games for as long as they did. The amount of lives that were lost in continuing to put up with the games of the Netanyahu government and having them drag us around from Gaza to Iran to Yemen, it's been ridiculous, and we should never forget that. And hopefully, if peace comes from this, great. Praise to whoever deserves it. And if Donald Trump can accomplish peace from this, great. He gets all the praise. But we should not forget the amount of lives that were lost throughout all of this for this pointless war that we should have never for a second been involved in, and been involved to the degree that we were in. Let's not forget we funded this entire thing. We gave weapons throughout this entire thing, and we took immense diplomatic pressure because we were the only major country, really, that was supporting Israel throughout this entire war. So, while peace may come out of this current ceasefire deal, and I'm hopeful that it can, the effects on the state of Israel that this war has had are going to be felt for generations now, because the younger generations are very much against the state of Israel, and that doesn't seem like it's going to be turning around anytime soon, no matter how much PR they pump out about how much people love Netanyahu now. No, that can't change overnight. The world has seen too much death and destruction has been on video coming out of Gaza. People have seen the reality of war and the reality of what the IDF has done to the people of Gaza. And it's created a generational view of the state of Israel that just cannot be undone. So we'll see what comes out of this. Again, hopefully this means the end of this war. And if it does, that's amazing news. So that's where I'll end it off for today. Thanks so much for being here with me today, guys. If you won't mind going down below, like and subscribing on this video, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you go to my X, Instagram, and Spotify accounts, I'd really appreciate that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.